Hi, so we're beginning now. The Hangout is now live. Uh, I'm happy to have all of you here for this first conversation about language. And I've called it Is Your Signal Weak or Strong? Um, and we'll have to see whose signals are weak and strong over the course of this conversation. So to make it easy, I've just structured a few questions so that we can maybe talk about the subject in relation to those questions. And so the first question for today is, how do you communicate when you do not know a language? I think we've all been in places where we have not known the language that another person is speaking, or even when it comes to animals or other beings, we do not know how to communicate in the normal method of communication. Rahul, can you put your video off?
Hello?
Yeah, can you put your video off?
Put my phone off?
No, put your video off. Can you turn the video off?
Yeah, Sapisha, you might need to use the
Control.
control, yeah, and switch
All right.
the video.
Okay.
I'm not able to put my video off.
Yeah, so you have
Okay.
introduced the first question.
Yeah.
So how do we communicate when you do not know a language?
Yes.
Many of us are in the conversation.
Sorry?
How many of us right now?
I'll think about it.
All right. So, does anybody have thoughts on how to?
Yeah. So I mean, I don't know if someone else wants to start. If someone else wants to start, I would be happy to let him start. Otherwise, I'll just jump in.
Okay. Maybe you
Okay.
can begin, and
Yeah.
we'll.
Okay. So the question is about knowing a language.
Yeah.
And that's where I've stopped actually, because do we know what it means for us to know a language? Like, is knowing the syntax, is knowing the construct of a language all you need to let's say to articulate in that language, or is basically what is knowing a language?
Yeah. So that's what I'm trying to get at. So, what do you do when you don't speak the same language with the other being that you confront? I mean, many of us.
So you're
sign
referring
language.
to the syntax. You're referring to knowing a language in the sense knowing the
Exactly.
vocabulary, knowing the
Yeah.
So we just
I felt like this is Satya. I felt like Malvika was talking also in terms of talking to beings that are not human. So then it's not a case of syntax, it's also a case of communication. You know, like it's like how.
Say that
Sorry?
again, Rahul.
Malvika, I can't hear anything.
Oh, okay. Are you using it from your phone? It could be that.
Prayas's voice, I think.
It could be because you're using the phone. Have you logged in through the phone?
Yeah, can I log in through my computer?
Yeah, it would be better through your computer.
Okay, 1 second. Going there.
Okay. So yeah, to continue. Sorry, Satya, can you continue?
Yeah, actually, Prayas was talking about the syntax of a language, and I
Yeah.
felt like we were not only talking about syntax, or we can think of it like that too, but isn't when we try to communicate to a non-human,
Hmm.
it's not so much about syntax. It's the language could be other types of language, such as the language of touch.
Right.
So, does that have a syntax, or is there something else before that?
Don't you think that over time, even that would end up having a syntax because each touch would have an association? I mean, when you deal
Right.
with animals, that's what ends up happening, that the animal understands certain kinds of touch to mean something.
Right.
Right.
I mean, when one tries
Syntax
to,
is formula. It's not just about association.
Okay. Say that again, sorry.
Syntax involves a formula. It's not just about association.
Hmm.
no, but when you try and educate someone else about what different uh, things that a touch consists of, what do they mean? Then then you do break it down into a syntax. You do try and be
But
specific about.
is that the first stop for, because the question we have is how do you communicate when you don't know the language? So when we start off communication, do we think about syntax, or is there something even before syntax?
No, that's precisely my point. You don't. So you forget all the syntax that you know
No,
of.
you can forget it when you know it. I mean, you can, in the sense, when you know how to play music, you can forget trying to play each note. I mean, you can just do it instead of trying to do it.
But I think when you
But
talk about syntax, what you usually end up doing is attributing what you feel is that mode of communication into a language you don't know. I mean, if you look at it from the way an animal may try to communicate with you, it will be the way it feels is the right way to communicate something to you. Say whether it's a dog barking to warn you about something. In the
Right.
same way, if you don't know a language, you assume that the person whom you're trying to communicate with will understand the way you are trying to communicate with them. So in a way, you're also laying down
Yes.
your rules.
Yeah,
But don't you know?
I
Sorry.
think assumptions are an important thing to look
Yeah.
at.
Hmm.
The word assume that you used just now,
Yeah.
it's like these assumptions are what actually allow us to train. I think we are constantly doing it consciously and unconsciously, and that I think is somewhere at the basis of communication, language,
So,
syntax,
so you're saying
whatever.
that assumptions help communication. You're saying that. Are you
They
saying that?
are they are at the foundation of what we call communication as human beings, and what we understand of as communication between us and non-humans or between two animals. That's what I'm saying. It's at the foundation.
And I guess that's also something which would lead to misunderstandings in the long run. Even within,
Exactly.
say, two
That's
people
why.
knowing a language. Sorry. Yeah.
clearly there's something
We
that your
need to
dog has to
understand.
say.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
One second, I'll just stop
No,
that.
that's
Sorry.
fine.
No,
That's
no, it's
okay.
okay.
No, mine might join in anytime.
Right.
Then that's where our question comes into play. What do we say
Yeah.
to
That's
them?
So,
Satya.
what? How do you know that the other person is going to understand what you say? You know, the assumption that your what you say will be understood is also questionable. So at that moment when you don't know it, the first time you're meeting someone, they don't know the language, you are trying to communicate that it's at one level instinctive to um, uh, find some way of communicating, and from there I think we formulate some sort of a language. Now, that is not going to be related to any of the structures that we are already familiar with. It may be a new structure.
But Malvika,
Yeah.
Ha.
assume, assume that we, even when we are instinctive,
Yeah.
are operating outside our culture, is a very tricky assumption. Like I might say, say for example, I went to Tamil Nadu this time and
Ha.
spent my time there, and I do this elders, and yes, I was instinctive.
Rahul, we're not hearing you properly.
Yeah, you
Hey,
might need
Rahul,
to.
shut down your video. Maybe then it might
Yeah,
help.
you're right. You're right.
I should not be able to shut down my video. I'm
So,
not getting.
so there's a panel on top which has a video camera button. So you just turn it off. Press
Just make
that.
it red.
Make it red.
Just make it right.
I'm not able to do it for you either. Otherwise, I would have done it from here.
You can ignore Rahul.
Oh no.
No way.
Okay. Try. Just go
So
ahead.
basically, I think I'm trying to add a flavor here.
I see. Thanks, Aditya. Who was it? Was that Aditya or who was it?
It was Yogi.
Oh, hi, Yogi.
Hi. Hello.
Yeah.
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 So, Rahul, do you want to continue what you were saying? Okay, I think we've lost him. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think what I heard of what Rahul was saying was that to make a claim about an instinctive communication, which is let's say outside the framework of language, or outside syntax at least, would be a very tall claim. That's where he stopped him. So
What is the tall claim? That to have anything before syntax?
to be able to be instinctive, to be outside the framework of language.
No, I'm not saying it's outside the framework of language. I'm looking at what um, how you build a language, because I'm coming from the point of view of being a visual artist, and how as an individual I formulate a language over a certain amount of time, and that doesn't, of course, that it's hard to pin down all the things that come into formulating that language, but it's
But
not.
if one does a empirical enough research, I mean, a broad enough, rigorous enough research, wouldn't one be able to catalog each and every, let's say, divergent part of your syntax and actually be able to? I mean, of course, that will only be possible after you stop painting, because till you are able to extend your language, there is no pickling it. There is no trying to bind it down to a set of rules. One can only try to speak after the fact is over.
But now we are talking about documenting the rules. Shouldn't we be talking even before that, which is there are no rules even yet. It's
Exactly.
a soup. It's a soup. You're wallowing in the soup and you're trying to swim through it, and you're trying to reach out to something else that's hanging about in that soup or in another soup.
Yeah. So I mean, I think we are speaking of these two things. One is during the act, when there is some act of communication that is ongoing, and one is after. So when it is ongoing, you might not be actually aware of how you are managing to communicate, but after you can parse it down to a syntax.
Sure, yeah. That
Right.
makes
I
sense.
have another question. Maybe Marcus can answer. I'm curious what happens with programming languages. I mean, if you look at it from that framework, how we develop a language, and of course, I do understand that there it is very functional. You want a specific
Yeah.
uh, function to be performed. But those are also expanding. I mean, the amount we're able to do technologically, those languages have also become rather complex. Marcus, what do you think?
Not all of these have necessarily become very complex. Actually, there's even new programming languages that are still being invented, and they try to break it down to very basic words, a very basic syntax, and it just becomes more complex as you put additional layers on it. But you always try to break it down to very simple programming syntax. So the way you try to control things. So it's basically about logic and about making things work.
Don't you think that's pretty much how we look at other languages too? I mean, we're just trying to make our communication efficient. Try to say the things we really want to say in the best possible way.
But ideally, that's what you can always break language down to these. But of course, it's just easier if you have a certain vocabulary, because then you don't need so many words to describe a certain thing or a certain verb. Either a noun or, I mean, if you say a noun, like if you have a big vocabulary, that means it just becomes easier to express yourself if the other person also shares the same vocabulary. I think that's what it boils down to in a certain way. And then it doesn't even matter whether it's about spoken language or about body language. I think that's what we were talking about initially when it came to communicating with non-human things.
Yeah. So, Marcus, I've actually been curious about something for some time, which is the way you train let's say the way you make a compiler, right? So a compiler is something which let's say makes sense of language, right? So the way you make a compiler, isn't that about really first sweeping very broadly? So that all the so let's say each and every element of language, let's say all the text, for example, all the text is parsed and let's say tokenized. So which tokens which are predefined, which are compilers pre-trained to search for. When those are found, when the match is happening, then those are tokenized. So, I mean, the question is about if you think if natural language compilers are essentially what our minds are, in the sense, you can speak English and I can understand, and I can speak English and you can understand it. So in a way, is what our minds are doing, is it working like a compiler of a natural language?
Yeah, I think so. I think you can really compare it like that in a certain way, because what a compiler does, it breaks down these higher languages into more basic languages, and in the end it just breaks it down into a sequence of ones and zeros. So yeah.
Marcus also used the term logic, which I think there are two things here: vocabulary, syntax, three things maybe: vocabulary, syntax, and logic.
Yeah.
So I think language itself is the expressing the intention of the logic, right?
Uh-huh.
And so,
Yeah, also, yeah.
and the logic is different for each person or each being.
Yeah, yeah.
Ah, okay. Well, that I think it becomes quite tricky. But I think there's a way of breaking down logic in a very mathematical way where there is no doubt about whether it's this one's logic or that one's logic. I think there should be one universal
in a
truth.
program,
Yeah.
the only entity whose logic a program cares for is the programmer's logic, right? So the one who's writing the program, the program only cares for that person's logic, whoever
Not
is writing
necessarily.
the program.
Not necessarily, because you're
I
trying
don't
to
think
communicate.
Yeah. It rather cares about its own logic that it, I mean, the logic that it's been created with, kind of.
Okay, so let's.
So yeah, my thing with I'm glad Satya brought up this thing of logic, of each person's logic being different, because that's precisely what I'm curious about when 2 or 3 different writers write about the same location. Let's say you pick a city like Delhi, and 2 different writers are going to see Delhi in completely different ways. And they, or even if they are in the same building, they're going to see different things, or they're going to describe it differently. And they're going to have different vocabularies, and it just opens up other perspectives to, and language, I think, helps in opening up those other perspectives.
But I think that's, sorry, no, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll just finish up. So my question is regarding this vocabulary, when we can break the existing structures to try to bring in more, and that's what we essentially do as creative people, to try to push our language to bring in more, to see if we can include other perspectives. So that's
I think
what
perspective is the term, and not logic. I think logic is something else in that way. So it's not different people's logics. I think different people have different perspectives and use different vocabularies and have different associations. But I think logic is something else. So the logic should ideally be the universal in
I
this
think
universe.
the way I look at logic is the construction of that person. So perspective is one thing, which is the view of that person based on how they are constructed. So perspective is another thing that adds to the complexity.
But I think this whole idea of perspective and logic would also be attributed to, say, fields, whether it's the field of interest. So whether it's, say, when you're looking at a building, so whether if you're looking at it from an architect's or an artist's point of view, or if you're looking at a city, whether it depends on what your field of interest is that you'd write about the city or look at those details. Like a musician would look at more at spaces of performance and things related to that, or an architect would look at more of the structure of the city itself. So all of that itself would add to this whole idea of perspective and logic of a language. I mean, the same way with programming or with music.
I want to differ there. An architect or a musician may not only look at the structure or the spaces of performance. They may also be looking at something deeper before, and then the language is limited by their sphere of expression.
No, that's true, of course. Okay. I mean, it could also expand into other fields, but this could be a primary way of maybe looking at the way they could differ in terms of the language within these fields.
Makes sense.
I'm wondering if we could just move on to the other question, and I'm going back to that point of efficiency I made earlier of using language to try to make our communication as efficient as possible. I'm wondering why, whether we are placing a certain value on communication in terms of what makes it better or worse, and instead, should we look at it as just different ways of expressing an idea? rather than something being better or worse, because the same thing can be said in different ways, and it, like, because we're talking on about this idea of perspective, it may just throw light on a different aspect of the subject, which may not necessarily be better or worse.
How do you define better or worse?
which is my question too.
Okay. Well, if
This
you
whole
define it in the
thing.
classical context of communication, is basically you have a message and you want to get it across. So ideally, there's no loss from between the sender and the recipient.
Yeah. So, but there is always a loss, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So a better or worse communication would be the ratio between the signal and the noise.
Yeah, yeah. That would be the classical way, probably.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean,
yeah.
really, if we don't try and interpret that, then that will be a simplest way of looking at it.
Yeah.
Seemingly like the permutations and combinations are so infinite. I don't know how we can ever get a grip on this conversation.
That's true. We just have to wander around and see if we can at least sharpen our understanding in some way. I don't particularly think we can get a grip, but I've just been curious about how one develops this idea of language, and sometimes I wonder whether we also get in some ways programmed by it. We just take it for granted that this is how a certain language is, and so we find a comfort zone there, and I'm wondering if those comfort zones can be broken and whether there's more to discover even within the language that we know.
Malvika, you spoke of efficiency, and I feel like if one becomes, that's an interesting hook in terms of if you become aware of your own expression and you want to make it more efficient,
yeah,
or you want to shift it some ways, then maybe that's one tool which you can use to, or one can use to examine and shape.
Aditya, would you like to say something? Moby? Okay, I didn't know if he's there. Yogi, how about you?
I'm trying to still get a grip on it, maybe.
No, how do you?
I'm Marcus, by the way.
How do you understand it as a musician? I'm curious. Like, your music has a certain language, and I'm talking of a musical language. And we haven't spoken of musical language so far. We've spoken about things to do with text or word or visual.
Mm-hmm.
So
I don't have a particular take on this, but I feel language or words are a very, surface things. I mean, they're very much on surface, but
right.
what is there behind are emotions. And when you talk about language, I think it has a lot to do with emotions. And you can fake your words, you can just use lines, but you do not mean it, and I think it's about how do you express, and that's where I believe when you talk about music, music does not have words or any other art forms too in that manner, but it can still touch that particular emotion within you, which can create a new wave of thoughts within you. It can even evoke a new life within you, and that is what, I mean, when you talk about musical language, it's like language of expression. So, see, this is a very broad subject, to be honest with you.
yeah, so where would you like to
yeah, but I mean, I'm assuming that we are not treating we're not looking at any hierarchy between different media. We are only talking about degrees of sharpness, right? So, I mean, in words one can cloak, but so can one do it in music. So that's what pop music is about. It's just using the the pragmatics of music without anything to back it up, as in the same thing that Yogi, you were just saying about emotion. So I'm sure there is soulless music.
But
Yeah,
it's
so
soulful to somebody.
yeah,
I
exactly.
think one of the criteria of all this communication that we're talking about is to have a widest possible outreach for any single thing.
Right.
We are not talking so much about communicating with oneself. We are not talking, but though it does exist, we're not talking so much about communicating with individuals, but of the possibility, I think, of that communication to have as broad an outreach as possible.
So are
I
we
think
talking of mass communication? So is that the frame?
no, it doesn't translate to mass communication. It translates to as wide an outreach as possible. So if Yogendra was talking about music
Yeah.
and emotion, I think he somewhere in the consciousness of that statement, it is about how much that is going to have an outreach. That language of his, how many people's emotions is it going to touch? If
That's a
Malvika
very
is speaking about working on a language for her paintings, then again, it is about an audience, allowing her to communicate
Yeah,
with them,
yeah, but
whatever the
within
interpretations may be.
yeah, but with an audience, why do we necessarily value the more over the less?
And that's where efficiency comes. That is also one way of efficient communication because you're reaching a lot of people with what you're saying.
By
That's
more,
one form of efficiency.
are you talking of diverse, Lena, in terms of maximum outreach? You're talking of diversity and not necessarily number,
Numbers.
right? Yeah.
Yes, Malvika. I'm
Yeah.
talking about diversity
Right.
because it's
I would like,
multi-layered.
Is one conscious of it? I don't know. Is
No,
one
if
conscious of the outreach?
but just to position a thought experiment quickly, if I were to just talk to one person all my life, and I become very good, extremely good at talking to that one person, uh, would that be of less value than learning to talk to 200 people well? I mean, I don't know if that is going to be possible to be something which is very well. I mean, I can't get very good at that.
Mm.
But I don't
But
think there's a value associated with it. It depends on the
yeah, I
individual
mean, that's where I'm
circumstance.
getting I'm getting lost, because we are talking of efficiency, we are
But
talking of diversity.
Can I just interrupt and allow you to be a little lost there? Aditya is just he's not
Okay.
able to use his microphone, so
Okay.
he's typed a few questions. He
Yes.
said, "Can we speak of a hypothetical situation where there is no language and whether that that kind of a situation is possible?"
oh, can you repeat that, Malvika?
He's asking if we can speak of a situation hypothetically where there is no language. What do we do when there's no language? How do we communicate? Because we assume that we all are running to communicate.
So I think all of us must have encountered a situation where we are with a person who does not communicate English or the languages we know, and we've had to communicate through the ways of hand movements, body language,
Yes, that's what we
expression.
began with, yes. But I think what Aditya is trying to ask is this need to communicate. He's questioning that itself. What Wait, he says there are situations where we do not know another person's language. That's true. Yeah.
With the brain, as long as the brain continues to function in the way it does, it's difficult even to imagine Aditya's situation.
So would you say that communication is an instinctive tendency that all humans, all beings we know have?
I would assume so.
I think I could not get Leena's point very clearly. If Leena can elaborate on that.
Yeah, Aditya, we've already spoken about communication being touch or speech. It can be in any way, but uh, and Kritika also says we need to define language first. I don't know if we want to actually define language and bring it down to.
Are we including silence in the? I mean, do we consider? Are we linking language to some form of articulation?
Well, why shouldn't we include silence or the absence of communication as also something?
Because this is where also comes the communication with the self.
Yes.
Which is something that's there. I mean, it's continuous.
Yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Hey, managed.
Yeah, you've managed to join for the last 3 minutes, but yeah. Do you want to continue what you said that time? You said something about being in Chennai.
Yeah, I was just saying about syntax and communication, and I felt that, even when you think that we are being instinctive, we are using syntaxes that we are already informed of through common sense. And I mean, we know that, okay, this word, what is syntax? It is basically word, pause, grammar,
Yeah.
These are things that is actually technically syntax, no? And these things we employ even in our intuitive communication, but the syntax I employ in Tamil Nadu might not be in sync with the syntax of the person I'm employing it to. But I always use an instinctive, what do you call it? Assumption. That this is the meeting point of syntax.
Right.
So it's not really an. I mean, I remember very clearly once I was traveling from Chidambaram to Madurai, and I was in a bus with this person who was sitting next to me.
Yeah.
He BCom in a college in Tamil Nadu somewhere, and he didn't know a word of Hindi or English. I didn't know Tamil. This is 10 years ago. We shared 5 hours virtually together, and we were talking for this 5 hours. Okay, all this thing that what research I'm doing in Tamil Nadu, what he's studying, I mean, what his family structure is, everything came out in this 5 hour conversation that he and I had. And
how did you do it? I mean, have you ever spoken that way to anybody else?
I have. Like this time also, I had like a long 1 hour conversation with like a 10-year-old kid in a college in a school near Chennai.
Yeah.
And it's basically syntax becomes very important because it is pause and effect. I mean, it's pause, cause, and effect.
Yeah.
And so even if you don't know the meaning of the word, the pause following it, or the one half clause following it.
Yeah.
That really helps in communication. I think that really helps in communication the most, because intuitive communication is something that we find it very, very difficult to understand. Like when an artist is doing a painting,
right,
and that's kind of intuitive or consciously intuitive. But then we need interpretational layers for it. you know.
But I think it's also about the person who wants to read the language or understand the language and about how much they are willing to absorb from it.
Yeah, and I have this fantastic anecdote, you know, like 2006, I was in this Forge Performance Art Residency where there was this four English speaking and one guy traveling first time from Sao Paulo, first time from some out of China. So one guy knew nothing but Mandarin and one guy knew nothing but Portuguese.
Okay.
Nobody in the room spoke to them because they didn't know English. Okay. The discussions will all happen between us speaking English, English speaking people, like one somebody was from Israel and somebody was from England, two people from Delhi. But these two guys, this Mandarin speaking guy and the Portuguese speaking guy were constantly talking to each other. And they developed a friendship that was really weird because these guys knew few words of English, but we kind of dismissed them. But this guy no word of either Mandarin or Portuguese. But they spoke to each other the most, and they use this weird things that there is this translation dictionary called Passport that communicate from one language to the other. So one hand had a Mandarin copy of Passport from English Mandarin to English, and one hand Portuguese to English. Passport copies, and they use photographs. If they had to explain something to somebody would take something on the phone and show it to somebody. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about, and this is what I'm talking about that. And excellent, they will be chatting with each other. Communication, so they will be constantly chatting with each other, and that is like for me what do you call it, like a lesson to learn. When we say language is so important to communication, and when you see Paulo and this Chinese guy's name I've forgotten also, he or something his name is, he talking to each other and like constantly talk like best friends, like how people bitch and how they talk, that kind of speed of communication. Like, okay, I see this rethink this logic between this language and communication,
Right.
So that's pretty much what I was trying to say.
In fact, Kritika seems to have written something that connects up. She says, yes, I guess the minute we attempt to communicate, we create a language. And I think that's true. Yeah,
I think language is constantly created. Language is not something that is actual.
What was that? Languages, what did you say?
It's constantly created. It's never something that is fixed.
Yeah.
So Kritika is saying that in every action, in every practice, you will naturally create your own system. You'll create your own. Every action will have its have a system embedded in it. Is that true?
The thing is, if you want to communicate, how do you communicate without a channel?
Right.
Can we take these questions further for tomorrow, because our 40 minutes are up, and I'd love to continue, but I think we have two more discussions coming up over the next 2 hours. So can I hope to see you all tomorrow as well at the same time?
All right, tomorrow.
Yes. See you tomorrow.
Yeah. Okay, great. And those who want to join the next session also, you're most welcome. We can send you a link to join the next Hangout. It starts at 6. Satya is going to be hosting that.
All right.
Hope you guys can make it.
Okay. And it's related to the same subject. She's going to speak more about communication. Okay. All right. See you guys. Thanks for coming.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.